What is going on, YouTube? Hope you guys are doing fantastic today. Today is the week before we get SPL back. And so you know what I got to do? I got to talk about every team. I'm going to talk about the players. I'm going to talk about their expectations for just this phase and just what they need to head into Worlds, what their ceiling is, and what their floor is. Basically just an all-inclusive SPL rant video. It's not really ranting, but like just kind of talking about them. I'll put timestamps in the bottom so if you guys are curious about a certain team or my opinion on a certain team, it'll be there. And then, yeah, I'll just have a little sheet where you guys can see the entire teams and stuff like that if that's what you want to stare at the entire time. But it's mostly just going to be me talking. All right, we're just going to go left to right, starting with the Levi's, ending with the Ravens. There's no order to this. This is Rock's sheet that he made for me, and they're just in a random order. The Levi's change heading into this is Panda Cat's taking Zapman's spot. That is their only change. They still have the same coach. Slaney's still their coach. Nothing else has changed. And this was actually the last roster change that happened. Zap has not found another team. I think that this team has been the most underwhelming team all year. I think that they have not meshed all too well. I think Adapting and Shinto have not played too great together. I think Adapting Fine have been playing pretty okay together. And then I think Zapman and Ronnie have just not looked great this phase either. I think a change needed to happen. And I think it needed to be either mid or ADC. And I think maybe you guys are thinking, no way, Shinto's getting dropped. I think Shinto's been their most underwhelming player all year. I think even slightly more than Zapman. But I don't think you can find a replacement as good as Panda Cat to replace Shinto. So unfortunately, sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles. If your position is got a good replacement just waiting, you might just be the one replaced even though there's somebody that's playing worse than you. For the ceiling for these guys, I think Panda has two real possibilities on this team. The first option is he becomes kind of like that old duo lane of the Sanguine team where it was Ronnie and Netroid, and they both meshed together really well. They dominated a lot of 2v2s. They both scaled really well into the late game, and it just gave them an aggressive lane to play through. I think the old Levi's had three players that were fine with having the lane played through them, or they could have the lane played through them, but none of them wanted to play the game through them. Fine, okay, usually wants to scale for team fights. Shinto wants to scale for team fights. And Zapman wants to scale for team fights. Adapting wants to scale for team fights. You have four people looking to scale for team fights. And, I mean, Ronnie, not like the most aggressive support. So that entire team was just kind of fine with playing the game slow and just, if we get to late game, we'll win. Fortunately, they got to late games a lot and they didn't even win. Panda Cat is a player that likes to win his lane. He wants to play around him. He wants to go for the enemy purple. If he has the lead, he wants to push it. I think this could bode really well for them. Or I think it could just be the straw that breaks the camel's back where their 2v2 doesn't feel all too great. Then they have another lane that just does not feel great and they feel even worse. Maybe they don't finish as bad as they did last phase, but I think there is a real possibility that this team is either going to be like a 7th seed, or I think that they can have this opportunity to be a top 3 team, probably on the outskirts of top 3, like 3-ish. But that's where I think their ceiling and their floor is, like 3 highest, 7 lowest. Going to the Masters winners, the Styx Ferrymen. This team was pretty solid, I guess is the best way to put it, through the phase. They didn't stand out as like a dominant team. But, I mean, you have Paul on your team, Sino, Cyclone, Baskin, Aurora, a bunch of players that really turn it up around tournament time. I think it was bound to happen that they were going to play really well. And shockingly, they played some near perfect Smite. It is some of the best brand of Smite we've seen in a long time. Very few mistakes. Even their 3-0 finals against the Oni Warriors, it was not even close. It looked like a major league team versus a minor league team. Baskin's playing like the best player in the world right now. It's season 10 when he came into the league in season 2. I think Cyclone is making a case for being the best ADC in the game at season 10 when he started in season 1. I think he started season 1. And then, I mean, Paul, tournament time, probably in a lot of people's opinions. I will not include mine because I think it's a lot closer than people say it when they say Paul's the GOAT. I mean, Paul's been playing like the GOAT and he played like the GOAT in Masters. And then Sino and Aurora are just really good pieces to have on this team. Even though I don't think Aurora and Sino are the best mechanical players, I think they fit perfectly and I think they really help this team expand what they need to do. Baskin, Paul, Cyclone can all hard carry. And Sino and Aurora do not play for KDs. It's a perfect fit. I think their ceiling is obviously being the best team in the league. And then their floor, maybe they have a little bit of a tournament snooze period. But I don't think so. I'm not too worried about this team coming back down to earth and not continuously playing great. I think 3 is probably their floor for the regular part of this phase. Because there is just that chance that one of these teams that makes those changes just instantly flies off the handle, and just starts popping off. But I see no chance they go lower than 3. Gilded Gladiators, 2 changes going into this. Awesome Jake in support, Kana and solo. I think 2 pretty good changes, as unbiased as I can say it. Last phase, not to touch on too much stuff from my point of view, but a lot of just bad plays. We didn't mesh well. I think Snoopy is not a great player. I think everyone else on this team, though, has the talent to be on a maybe 6 seed-esque team. I think Jake, obviously, coming from the number 1 seed, I think he's obviously the best player on this team. Jake has been putting on a performance ever since phase 1 started, and the meta has not shifted too much. He was very, very good on those mages in support, and I think that those are not that much worse. I think he can still play them. I'm curious if he will. I'm curious if he won't. If the meta shifts away from that, I think Jake kind of comes down to that 5, 6, 7 area in supports. But if they stay towards those mages, I think he can be 1, 2, 3. The Gilded Gladiators team, though, I think it's very hard to not predict them as an 8th seed, and that's kind of my floor. I think their ceiling isn't much higher, unfortunately. I think every other team is going to be super competitive this phase. I think their ceiling is maybe 7th, and that's being generous. I personally just do not see a world where they do not finish 8th. Moving on to the Kings, their change was genetics getting dropped for Quig, and actually it was genetics leaving for Quig. Genetics did not get dropped. And I think this could be a surprising change for these guys, and I think they could surprise a lot of people. I think Quig is one of the most underrated players in the league. I think what he did for that Hounds team, I don't want to say goes unnoticed, but I think it was very underrated. He's a very good shot caller. He's mechanically very good. I actually think he's better mechanically than genetics, but I think his shot calling is slightly worse. But when you have a team that has so many good shot callers, I think people underestimate how much variety Twig and Yarkor did for kind of shot calling, and they put a lot of it onto genetics. Even though he's their main shot caller, I think it was a bit underrated what the other 3 did. And then I think Big Man as a backliner with Yarkor is probably the strongest backline in the entire league, bar the Styx Ferrymen. I think their ceiling, they don't really have a chance of being the 1 team, the 1 seed. I think the Ferrymen kind of have that locked up. It's going to be really hard to predict a team being in that 1 seed other than the Ferrymen, and another team we'll get to later. So I'm going to say 2 is their ceiling, and I think their floor is going to be somewhere around 6. I think there is a chance that this change doesn't work, and genetics was actually a lot more to this team than it was kind of led on. But I do think that genetics was given a lot more respect, and it was taken away from some of the other players. So I'm going to say 2 and 6 is their floor. Oni Warriors, just to say it right out, this team has the potential to be the number 1 team in the league still. Genetics for Awesome Jake is a change that is very, very different, because the style of player that Jake is versus genetics is like a flip of a coin. One is the head side and one is the tail side, and they're nothing alike. When you look at what this team wants to do, they're just 4 mechanically gifted beasts in their role, and when they get on a roll and they start playing Smite well together, they're impossible to play against. I think their problems comes down to consistency. They have that chance to be the number 1 team, and then they have the chance to be like a 5, 6 team. And I think their ceiling to floor is some of the highest in the league with just what could happen with this team. There's a lot of strong personalities on this team. Netroid, genetics. I think Panatom is pretty strong, opinionated also. Solo and Pagon might be a bit more laid back, but if this doesn't work out, Netroid and genetics could just go back to that Kings squad that the changes happened where Net and genetics, I don't want to say beefed, but they didn't get along completely. And so maybe something happens there. But again, they have that chance to be the number 1 seed. They also have the chance to be like a 6 seed. I would predict them a little bit higher towards that 3, 4-ish area, but there's always a chance. That's why I like the floor to ceiling instead of just predicting where I know they'll land. Jade Dragons. This team is strange because I don't know exactly how I feel about them. I think along with the Warriors, I think they have the highest rate of biggest ceiling and lowest floor. Their floor is really dependent on how well that they play the game of Smite coming to this next phase. And I think a lot of it comes down to how comfortable is Mike going to be in this meta for supports. In my opinion, I think Mike was one of the worst supports in phase 1. I think he just did not fit that meta well at all. Whatever happened, I think he kind of forced himself onto it. But I don't think it was completely on him either. I think a lot of it stems from his team just not being able to play around him in that role too well either. Just speculation, what I could say is maybe scrims didn't go all too well with those picks and they would just keep forcing it, or it was banned away a lot in scrims so they didn't have time to play it and to get used to it. But this team really comes down to a lot of like what the meta is going to be. I don't think they struggled too much with consistency, but I think God Pool is a little bit of an issue with this team. I think Dardes has a pretty funky God Pool. I think Mike has a little funky God Pool, and I think Lasbra has a funky God Pool. If the meta shifts out to where they can all play their gods, this team has potential to be probably a 3 seed highest, but if it doesn't work out like that, I think they could go all the way down to 7th and maybe even 8th seed, which feels bad to say. They're just very weird team, and I can see both sides where they're really good and both sides where they're really bad. So it really just comes down to what does the meta look like, and I've not been able to watch any Pro League Smite, so I have no idea. Could be great, could be bad. I don't know what the meta is looking to be. I'm excited to see it, but just guessing, I think this Jade Dragons team is just a 50-50. The Hounds, Neilma in, Quig out, and I think that hurts this team a lot. But as unbiased as I can say it, I think Neil on this team is not going to be very beneficial to them. I think this is the only other team that I think really contests the Gladiators as the 8th seed. And I don't think it comes down to any of the 4 players that were on the team before. I think Ducky, Oath, Benny, Vaporish, Coast are all dominant players. I think Oath has potential to be a top 3-4 jungler. I think Coast, top 3-4 ADC. I think Benny and Ducky are middle of the pack solo and mid laners. But I just think Neil is not in a great spot to succeed because he doesn't have incredible players around him that can carry him consistently, or maybe even just get hot at the correct time. There is a chance that they just ride out the rest of this year. All of them are playing very, very well. Neil doesn't have to do anything spectacular like he had to do, or like the PK year with Zapman and Paul. There's always that chance, but I just don't expect to see it. I think this team has a ceiling of 5, and I think their floor is like 8th. I'm not too high on this team. I do think they'll be better than Gladiators. If I would predict them, if I had like a 1 to 8 power rankings, I think it would be Glads 8, the Hounds 7th, but I'm not going to predict them lower than the Glads, but I still could see them finishing that low. And then lastly, the Highland Ravens, Haddock, Scream, Venenu, Barra, and Hurry. Honestly, this team I'm very high on for this next phase. For the entire first phase, this team was playing incredible. I think Hurry was a bit underrated in support. I think Barra was a pretty average ADC, but I think he was very consistent, which is what you get from Barra. I think Ven played like a top 3-ish mid laner. I think Haddox was a top 2 solo laner. I think Scream was a top 2 jungler. I think it just comes down to, again, can they keep that up, or will they look like they did in the playoffs where the Hounds just kind of picked them apart? Because the Hounds, nearly every single role, outplayed the Ravens in that playoffs. If that happens again, this Ravens team does have that chance to fall down. But I'm predicting the opposite, where I think they're going to mesh together really well. They're all going to play their brand of Smite, which is play around Scream, play around Haddox. When Haddox rotates from that solo lane, that's when we want to fight. Farm up, farm well, farm consistently. And when Haddox rotates from solo to that Gold Fury fight, be ready to fight and be ready to take that fight. My prediction for this team is I think they'll be a 2 seed with their high, and I think they're low. I'll say 5, but I really don't think they'll finish lower than 4th because I'm very high on this team, and I think that they'll succeed. But there it is, all 8 teams. Just a quick, my guess for 1 to 8, because now that I said the ceilings and the floors, it'll be a little fun to say my 1 to 8. My 1 seed, I'm going to say the Ravens, or sorry, the Ferrymen. My 2 seed is going to be the Ravens. We'll say 3 Warriors, 4 Levi's. We'll do 5th Kings, 6th Dragons, 7th Hounds, and 8th Glads. That'll be my prediction for my 1 to 8. And this is just for the phase. Leading up to Worlds, the meta is probably going to change a lot. And even leading up to the tournament before Worlds, the meta will change a lot. So this is just a prediction for this phase. I hope you guys like the video. Wanted to try a little bit of SPL content because I feel like there's not a ton out there. So maybe you guys are interested. If you guys are interested, you like this video, leave a thumbs up, like it, comment, say this is great, do more SPL content. Because I know you guys like the other stuff, and I'm going to keep doing that, obviously. But I do think that there's just a severe lack of SPL content out there, and I think it could help fill the void a little bit. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you guys again next time. Peace.